So I'll call the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, February 13th to order. And looking at the agenda, are there changes? I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We have two delegations this evening. First is from... Oh yeah, it's only the afternoon. Getting ahead of myself. This afternoon. First from Lafarge and Exshaw, Mr. Bachman. Welcome to Council.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you bet.
So I'm here to talk about our new initiative at Lafarge. Very exciting. It's something we've been doing for over 50 years around the world, but it's finally making its way to good old Alberta. And I think we all have to ask ourselves the question, how are we adapting to the low carbon world that's out there? Are we carpooling more? Are we looking at electric cars? Are we looking at our mileage? Are we turning off the lights at home? I know I'm the big cheerleader for turning off the lights at home with my family. But the reality is it's an issue. It's a global issue that we need to address. Lafarge is a part of the problem. The cement industry as a whole contributes to about 5% of the global CO2 greenhouse gas emissions at the global scale. Lafarge Wholesome is a the largest cement producer. So, like I said, we're part of the problem. We want to be a part of the solution. You're all aware of the climate leadership plan that's been unveiled in Alberta and what that means, the targets that are out there. And again, when it comes to the cement industry, we have some rigorous targets we need to hit. Fortunately, in our case, as you know, we modernized our plant over the past several years, and world-class state-of-the-art equipment. There's not better technology out there right now to make cement. So we're in a quite good position to hit these targets. Like I said, this is not new news for Lafarge. We've had this sustainability plan in place for many years. This is our 2030 plan, is what we call it. Many targets related to climate leadership, circular economy, that's reuse of certain aggregates, etc. Water and nature, which we can check the box there. We've significantly reduced the amount of water that we use at the plant through the expansion. And certainly people and communities. It's an expectation for us to be integrated in all of our communities around the world. I'm here today to talk about that first one, the climate, and how we can make a positive impact. Our aim is actually, as a company, by 2030, we expect over 1/3 of our revenues as a global company to come from these types of circular economies or reducing our costs through low carbon fuels, etc. So there are some myths going around town around what we are and what we will not use as a fuel, what we're proposing to use as a fuel. These are the only 8 fuels that we are proposing to use at the plant. These are tried and true fuels that are already being used in the other provinces across Canada. Like I said earlier, this is the first of its type in Alberta, but certainly not the first of its use in Canada or around the world. And I'll show you a further slide on this. But all of these are very good fuels for our plant, very effective. We are a large energy user. It's the nature of the beast. When you're making cement, we bring our temperature inside the kiln up to 1600 degrees Celsius or higher. That takes a tremendous amount of fuel. We're currently permitted to use natural gas and coal. But as you know, these are fossil fuels, non-renewable fossil fuels. And it's interesting that Andrew and I are presenting on the same day. He's going to talk to you about what you can put in the landfill, and I'm going to talk about what we can take out of it. And
Purely coincidental, you know, that you're both here today.
yeah, it's quite the coincidence. But these are very good fuels, and we use as much energy in our plant on any given day as the entire city of Red Deer, just to put it in perspective. That's how much energy we use at the plant here in Exshaw.
Just before you go on, tell me what tire fluff is.
Tire fluff is basically the result of whether it's from a car or from car tires. It's the waste product that doesn't go back into the recycling industry. The last thing we want to do is compete with recyclers. So if there's recyclable plastics, recyclable rubber, we aren't interested in taking those streams out of the market. We're really just interested in the streams that would normally end up in a landfill. So it's the waste product from the tire manufacturers that don't make its way into the tire.
Thanks.
And also, you know, shredded up car seats, shredded up, waste products from the car industry is one of our fuel streams too. So because this is new to Alberta, we've partnered up with some independent third-party experts to help us through this project. By the time we're done, this will be the most studied project of its kind in the world. And as it should be. Look where we live. It's a very pristine area. We have a community right next to us of Exshaw and Lac des Arcs. We want to do it right. And so we've engaged University of Calgary in Queens in Ontario, where they've been doing this for years, as I mentioned. Calgary is our local contributor. Pembina, as you know, works a lot with the provincial government. And then WSP does our air modeling. Millennium does the human health risk assessment. And then Geocycle is our subsidiary of Lafarge that handles our waste to fuel type projects that we're working on. Like I said earlier, these fuels are not new to Canada, just new to Alberta. You saw the 8 fuels we're proposing to use, and the only 8, but for example, all of the fuels we've represented are already being used in one or all of the other provinces highlighted up there in our cement plants where they exist. Obviously, these sorts of initiatives can create a lot of emotions, uncertainty, fear sometimes, so we've really gotten ahead of it before we even issued the permit application to AEP in October last year. We spent about 15 months of outreach to talk about the fuels, talk about the process. And really, if I leave you with anything today, I would talk to you about the 3 T's in the cement manufacturing world that make us the ideal source for these sorts of fuels. The first one is temperature. I already talked to you about that. It's a very high temperature. We completely combust these fuels. There's nothing left. There's no ash like you would see in an incinerator operation. Time is the other factor. These fuels are exposed to this high temperature flame for up to 6 seconds, which again, incinerators, it's more of a flash approach, instantaneous. And then the last T is turbulence. Our kilns are spinning. The fuels, the materials inside the kiln are very hot, constantly churning. So therefore, no ash product. Everything we use ends up either captured on the back end of the process or incorporated into our cement product. Here's the local advisory committee we pulled together, local stakeholders. I'm sure you recognize a few names up there, but we've tried to really focus in on some NGOs, local NGOs of interest, and local stakeholders. The meetings have been, like I said, going on for almost 18 months now, and they've been our partners through the process and challenged us, and in a good way, and we're happy with where we're at right now. So here's a conceptual drawing of what we're looking at. There is a storage and receiving facility that would be located on the west side of our property. And then that's the large gray building you see in the foreground. We have rail access very near to that, so that's attractive because in the future, if there are fuels available by rail, that certainly would reduce any truck traffic that we'd be bringing through the hamlet of Exshaw. But we've modeled it as if we're bringing all the fuels in by truck, and it amounts to 1 to 2% increase in truck traffic is all. So fairly negligible increase in truck traffic on the 1A. And you see the conveyor going up to our tower. That would be our first phase of the operation. That would get us up to about 50% substitution, which for a plant of our size, we are the largest plant in Canada, cement plant in Canada. We're the number 3 plant in all of North America. For us to do 50% substitution would be world class. And that's our target. That other line that's red and peels off to the right there in the background, that is a line that would take us to the front end of the kiln where we have a secondary burner. And that could get us up to 80% substitution, which again, if the market is there and the fuels are available, we would certainly, and economical, we would certainly pursue that. Wrapping up here, we did quite, like I said, we've done a lot of work just to get the permit application in place. We did air dispersion modeling, which basically took those 8 fuels, took the worst actors out of any of the fuels, whether it was heavy metals, sulfur emissions, nitrogen emissions, particulates, etc., and assumed that we were going to use all of the worst on any given day, maximum production, worst meteorological conditions, and modeled it. Basically a 30-kilometer grid was laid over the plant. And I'm happy to report there was no negligible changes from the work that was done in 2009, so there should be no concerns. And we used 5 years of data, meteorological data, so that tells you that even the inversions that we saw of last week and have seen periodically, even in inversion conditions, we do not exceed our limits. And then this data feeds into the human health risk assessment, which also I'm happy to report showed no negligible changes, no adverse health effects as a result of this fuel changing from natural gas to these low carbon fuels. And this just shows you how comprehensive the model is. It looks at our emissions out the stack. It looks at where these emissions could eventually get deposited and fall onto the ground and ingested through the vegetables that we eat locally, the fish, the wild game that we may eat, and that whole process of how the different pathways could affect a human's health were analyzed. And like I said, very happy to report there's no negligible effects. Last but not least, like I said, the emissions don't really change much from using natural gas, which we are doing today, to using up to 80% of low carbon fuels, which we hope to do tomorrow. Very negligible changes. But where we get the biggest change, positive change, is here on the life cycle assessment. The whole idea is to reduce carbon emissions. So I believe it's for every 20% substitution that we can put into of these low carbon fuels, we take 75,000 cars off the road, which is, no, I'm sorry, 75,000 tons of CO2, which I think is several 100,000 cars that would equivalent be taking them off the road. So a huge impact, positive impact on carbon emissions, and that's really our target, is to have some flexibility in our fuels, in the inputs, possibly more economic, because many of these fuels would be lower tax than natural gas or coal. But more importantly, it's better for the environment, reduces our carbon footprint. We are working through AEP. In Edmonton, we submitted the application back in October, then the holidays came, and they've had a few questions which we've clarified, and now the public notice, you may have noticed, went out in the paper, I think on Friday last week. And so the public comment period is open for the next 30 days, and we believe all of our work up front is going to lead us to have no statements of concern, but if there are some people who haven't got the message, we'll address those as they come up. Any lingering questions you might have, please check out lafargeexshaw.ca. Everything we've done is attached there. The public advisory meetings, all the independent documents that I spoke of. So welcome you to get more information there or reach out to me directly. That's all I have. Any questions?
Great, thanks very much. It's I've been curious for some time about what the full plan is and how it may impact or connect to the work we're doing in the Bow Valley. So great presentation. What is your hope for or anticipated start time? When would you make that transition?
So good question. Certainly we're hoping to have the permit approval this summer sometime. So in Q2 would be our target for the permit approval. Then it boils down to detailed design. It's probably going to cost several $100,000 to do a detailed design. That would be as far as we'd get this year, I would believe, best case. Then it goes to our board in Zurich for financing. We're also working on the province with ERA, Emission Reduction Alberta, on any potential provincial funding for this sort of project that is in line with their goals. If that's successful, we would look at financing and procurement in 2019, construction hopefully later that year, and we would hope to be operational by mid-2020. I'd say those are probably best case at this point.
And you'd be expecting or anticipating bringing materials to burn in from far and wide, I assume?
Mostly Calgary. The thing that hurts the fuels economically the most is transportation costs. So honestly, I'm very excited about the potential of working with the municipalities locally here. I'm sure there's synergies in some of these streams, and as we prove ourselves with these 8 fuels, not to say that we couldn't expand it in the future after we build some confidence in what we're doing. I need to walk before we run, so I would hope in the future, my dream would be this list of fuels would expand, and there could be some cost savings for the local municipalities in some way, and cost savings for us too. And at the end of the day, savings for the environment. So.
Great.
Yeah.
A whole bundle. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Bachman. I had a question for you of one of the materials you had on your list. You had rubber.
Yeah.
And is that rubber tires that you're referring to? In conjunction with Mayor Borman's question about tire fluff?
Yeah, rubber would be the waste product. Tire fluff would be the other products from the tire or from the upholstery in the vehicles. It's often referred to as tire fluff.
Okay. So isn't there a recycling stream for rubber currently?
For tires there is, but at the source of the tires, where the tires are manufactured, there's often a waste stream that doesn't make it onto the tire that often ends up in landfills.
Okay, so that's a secondary product from the tire.
That's a secondary product from, like I say, we aren't competing with the recyclable plastics or recyclable tires. And
what about shingles? Is there a recycle stream?
Shingles are excellent. There's mountains of shredded shingles in Calgary. It's a great fuel that we can use. It's, you know, after major hail events, etc. It's very seasonal. That's why we didn't want to pick any one fuel and commit to a predetermined mix of these fuels. We modeled it such that we could use 100% of any one fuel at any given time and still be within our limits.
And one last question, will you take unsorted fuel processes? Like if you've got construction demolition waste which is unsorted, are you would?
We work with a partner in Calgary that would go through the sorting and pre-qualification aspects of the fuels. So, you know, we do not accept just any. So it would have to be sorted. It's sorted. It's tested, and making sure that it meets our qualifications. We don't want any surprises.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Bachman. So you spoke to us about the outreach that you've been doing with regards to your project. And I was wondering if you could articulate what the biggest concerns you've heard from your local and wider community.
At first it was around the emission, the human health risk assessment, and that took a while to do because it's 5 years of modeling, 5 years of data that you have to model every scenario, and it's quite conservative in its approach. So first and foremost was the health side of things. Once that was resolved, everybody took a deep breath, thought some more. Oh, what about fire? What if you have a fire at the facility and the fumes that come from it? So then we went into the details of how we design these facilities. They're virtually fireproof. Then that alleviated that concern. So, and then traffic. So nobody wants to have, you know, that nuisance, if you will, in their backyard. So we did the modeling on the traffic and found that it was, like I said earlier, negligible effects. So, but the biggest thing is carbon. If you Google up carbon and greenhouse gases, you can find every opinion under the sun in terms of, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? How is it modeled? Is it, you know? And so that's been the biggest source of challenge, really, is, you know, what is the real carbon reduction you're going to see? What's the effect on the environment, greenhouse gases, et cetera? And that is why we've enlisted the Pembinas, the University of Calgary, all the PhDs to handle that part of it, because we aren't the experts in that area.
Right on. So is this project a direct response to the Carbon Action Plan, or is this just happening to occur at the exact same time?
Well, it's a little bit of a kick in the kickstart us,
Yep.
certainly. But like I said, we've been doing these sorts of activities for over 50 years around the world. It's just surprisingly never made its way to Alberta. And in a lot of the plants I've worked at in the U.S., I think to a degree we're a bit of a victim of our space. You have more waste, you just build another landfill cell and fill it up. So I think whereas in Europe, smaller countries, smaller footprint, tighter regulations, they're so far ahead of us in this realm. So we're playing catch up there. But I wouldn't say it's purely Alberta's government position that pushed us this direction. It's something we've been doing for decades.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming to present to Council.
For sure.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, great presentation, thank you. So non-recyclable plastic, so is that mostly plastic wrap, single-use plastic bags? What is that?
Yeah, I probably should have studied up on that a little bit more.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, there's certain classes of plastics. I think there's up to 4 different classes of plastics, and some are easily recyclable, some of them because of chlorine in some cases, and other constituents aren't as easily recyclable. But I believe it tends to be the film type plastics that are tougher than like the bottled water plastics that are pretty easily recyclable. This is more I think you're right.
And the film causes problems when it gets into the plant because it gets caught up in the rollers and they have to shut it down.
Yeah.
So that'll be a real positive.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You bet.
There's no other questions from members of council. Thanks very much for being here, Mr. Bachman. It's great information.
You bet.
Look forward to working with Lafarge through our public works to take advantage of the burn plant out there.
For sure. And I appreciate you and the steps you've taken locally to separate some of these streams, and we'll see where we can partner in the future, for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat recycling plant. You've been through it, or?
I'm looking forward to it. Some of my folks from Geocycle have been through it.
Great.
So,
yeah, it's a pretty interesting facility.
All right,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks for being here. Yep. And we have another delegation from the Bow Valley Waste Management Commission, Mr. Calder.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So we look forward to seeing, as everybody does, how that project unfolds and what synergies might exist between Bow Valley Waste and that project also. But first of all, thank you for your time and affording me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name's Andrew Calder. I'm the CAO of Bow Valley Waste Management Commission, and I wanted to come today really to just introduce myself, give some of council who I haven't worked with or haven't met before, make you a bit more familiar with Bow Valley Waste and the services that we provide in the local economy. So that's really my primary purpose for today. So Bow Valley Waste Management Commission is a regional service commission. We were formed about 20 years ago to provide solid waste management services to the local area, to the businesses, residents and municipalities in our service area. And we were founded by the towns of Canmore, Banff and the MD of Bighorn. So you're all members of the Commission. We're governed by the MGA, similar to the Council, and our Board of Directors, we have a Board of Directors of 6, made up currently with 2 from each member council. Vi Sanford and Esme Comfort are currently on our board, and then from Banff we have Peter Poole, Ted Christensen, and then the MD of Bighorn, Paul Ryan and Dean Cooper. Myself, the CAO, and we regularly liaise with administrative members from each of the members' administrations. Simon Robbins is here today, often attends our board meetings. We interact with Andreas Camo and a number of administrative members within your own administrations. Board members, while they're at the Commission table, are expected to act in the best interests of the region, the Commission, and not in their individual municipality. And their key responsibilities are really to set the strategic direction for Bow Valley Waste, to review and approve capital operating budgets, to approve financial statements, and to review the CAO performance. All of our meetings are public meetings. We would invite any of you to come along if you're interested at any time. We meet the 3rd Thursday of the month, every month. And we also try and keep member councils updated with what goes on with the Commission business by distributing our minutes. Approved minutes should reach you and to be put into your agenda packages at some point. So that's one way you can keep in touch with what's going on with us. Our overall mission as the Commission is to promote and provide responsible waste management solutions. And within that mission, we aim to be a leader in local responsible waste management in Alberta. We aim to do so on a financially self-sustaining business, and we also aim to work effectively internally and externally with the partners that we do business with. Francis Cook Landfill is probably the face of Bow Valley Waste that you are all most familiar with. I imagine most of you have been to the site at some point. It's located just east of Exshaw on Highway 1A. And we do provide a fairly essential role to the local economy by having a local option for hotels, restaurants, local businesses, construction industry, having an option where they don't have to travel all the way to Calgary to dispose of their waste, to recycle their wastes, is a big benefit to the local economy. Sometimes we fly under the radar, but I think that the services that we do provide are fairly essential for a healthy functioning economy, which is to the benefit of everybody in the area. We manage some regional, provincial funding for infrastructure projects, which we partner with for municipalities. For example, the East Regional Transfer Station, which was built a few years ago, was developed using provincial funding, which is managed by Bow Valley Waste. We also provide waste management advice and support to the local communities through our regional coordinator position towards zero waste events in the local area. And all in all, we employ around 12 full-time people out at the landfill. So this is the landfill on a nice looking day. Yesterday was not quite so nice. We had 50-kilometre-an-hour winds on top of all the snow blowing everything around. It can be a harsh working environment at some times, but as far as landfills go, I think it's a pretty nice one. We're regulated by Alberta Environment and Parks. Our landfill site deals only with Class 3 construction and demolition waste, so separate from the municipal waste streams to a degree, not the sort of waste that comes out of your residents' homes and goes in the bare bins. We don't deal with any food waste, any paints or chemicals. We deal with dry, inert construction and demolition waste mostly. And of that, we accept around 20,000 tonnes annually. Around 50% of that is separated for diversion and recycling. So around about 10,000 of tonnes of waste is landfilled and about 10,000 tonnes is recycled every year. And we do have a recycling program that includes segregation for most of the materials that typically come to us for receipt. So we have separate programs for recycling construction lumber, scrub and brush wastes, yard and garden wastes, asphalt shingles, drywall, concrete and asphalt, as well as metals. Our service area is, strictly speaking, the boundaries of the member municipalities, so the town boundaries of Banff, Canmore and the MD of Bighorn. We also receive waste from further afield, far out as Banff National Park, ID9 including Lake Louise, and the ID5 Kananaskis country. We're currently reviewing some of the charges and ways that the waste from out with our service areas handled. Currently, our operation is entirely funded by the Francis Cook landfill operation. So we, one of our key goals is to run as a financially self-sustaining business. That's to the benefit of all of our members. If Bow Valley Waste does run at a loss, then our members, the municipalities, are expected to cover those losses. So that's why it's so important to us that we run in the black, and we have successfully been doing so for a number of years. We are a not-for-profit organisation, but there are some long-term liabilities associated with running the landfill business, closure and post-closure costs being one of them, long-term development costs, as well as capital for machinery, etc. So tipping fees, the fees that we charge our customers to come in and dump their waste, provide the bulk of our revenues. We have an operating budget of around $2 million. Our fee structure is set up to try and encourage people to recycle, so typically the charges for dumping straight garbage which isn't recycled is around twice the cost that it would be if it was segregated and separated for recycling. So that's one way that we try and encourage people to source separate waste. And a big part of our business is also comes from the local industry, and lime waste is one of the big products that we deal with, not typically something that you would see at a class 3 landfill such as ours, but historically that's something that's been grandfathered into our operation. We do produce some revenue from excavation and sale of the excavated material. As we develop the site, then we excavate and fill the holes that we dig back up with garbage. That produces some revenues. We do also sell some landscape rock. We create a topsoil compost blend on site. Recycled asphalt, something that we do in-house. We crush that up, and I know that the town of Canmore, for example, their Streets and Roads division use that on a number of back alleyway resurfacing projects in town. Concrete is something that we're also just starting to crush up and hope to push into the local market also. So these are some of the materials that are available for use in the local area. My ultimate goal for the whole site is to bring in the waste from the local area, process it, and send it back out for reuse in the local area. Commission owns a variety of equipment: excavators, front-end loaders, processing equipment, screeners, crushers, these sorts of things. So again, something that is potentially available. Some of these machines are available for municipalities to use if you were ever in need of some of this equipment. Most of the material processing we do is in-house. Some of it we also contract out and bring in third-party contractors to work on. These are our statistics from the last 10 years or so. The recycling or diversion rate is the darker green line at the bottom of each year's performance. Unfortunately, our statistics have dropped off. The diversion rate has dropped off. The last few years we've hovered around 50%, and disappointingly this year, 2017 anyway, we dropped below 50%, and 47% of the waste that arrived on site last year was diverted for recycling. This is something that I'm keen to work on, and we're hoping to partner and discuss further with our member municipalities administrations to work on some strategies, some bylaws, perhaps some pricing strategies going forward that will help us put a renewed effort back into bringing the recycling rate back up as it was even 10 years ago. We were sitting in the 60, 70% range. So there's room to work on improvement there. Specifically to Canmore, I thought just to put these numbers in context, I would show you what comes from the town site. We track all the waste and where it originates. And around about 13,000 tonnes of construction and demolition waste is delivered from Canmore out to the landfill at Francis Cook every year. And most of that is delivered by commercial customers. So that's the big blue area, and then the residents and municipality probably take a similar number, 500 or 600 tonnes of waste comes from each of those guys out to us each year. So around about 13,000 tonnes every year. It's quite a number, but it speaks to the growth in the area, the development that is continuing in Canmore, and I think to put that into context, with the bare bin waste, then Canmore, going back a few years since the Commission used to manage the bare bin waste from Canmore, but I think it would be 3,000 or 4,000 tonnes of bare bin waste ends up in landfill from Canmore itself. So around 3 times that volume or tonnage of waste is produced by construction and development work that comes out to Francis Cook. So that's all going into the future. We are at the landfill working on better understanding some of the longer term reliabilities. Closure and post-closure costs are a big one, and we're working to try and better understand these to make sure that our member municipalities don't end up having to cover some of those costs down the line. We're aiming to balance our budget and make sure that we have cash set aside from our operation while we operate to cover these long-term costs. We're also working on longer-term operations plans for the site, developing a section of land on the north end of our property, which has to this point not been developed. As I mentioned before, we're looking at reviewing strategies to push that diversion rate back up to where it should be. We're also members of the Southern Alberta Energy from Waste Association. On behalf of member municipalities, we pay the membership dues to keep you guys posted on the development of that organisation. So these are some of the future projects that are ongoing. That's really all I had to say to you, but if anybody wants to check our website at a later date, then by all means do so, and here are my contact details. Thanks again for the time.
Thanks very much, Mr. Calder. Just curious, at the current rate of landfill that, as you detailed on a couple of the slides, how many more years would Francis Cook have? The
lifespan of the...
Yeah, at the current rate of landfill.
So we're currently reviewing the lifespan. Because we're developing on the northern end of our property, which has never been developed, then how that section of land is developed will tie directly into how long that piece of land could be expected to last. Our site's divided into two halves almost of equal size. The southern portion of the landfill we've been working for almost 20 years now, and we estimate, the last engineering estimate we have on that is for that to last another 15 years at current rates. So I would estimate that the northern end of our site should have at minimum 15 years to work, potentially higher, but overall I would say we're going to be operating 30 years plus into the future, and it's a key something that we factor in every decision is trying to extend the lifespan of the landfill and make its services available to the local economy for as long as possible. As I mentioned before, it is a healthy thing to have in the local economy, and we look to preserve that for future generations as long as possible. So we don't have a concrete answer for that, but 30 years plus. Okay,
that's just ballpark. That's all I was expecting. Yep. Thank you. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Calder. It's finally nice to actually hear from you, because I've seen your name on documents all the time I've been elected.
And that's half the reason we're here.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming to Canmore Council. So based on hearing Mr. Bachman's presentation and seeing the list of things that he's described as what they'll be able to consume within the kiln, do you see some natural synergies between the work that you do and the plans for expansion at Lafarge plant?
Well, I would have to say yes.
So
yeah,
like a big construction list.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the list that Jim's provided is pretty similar to the list of things that go into our landfill. So I definitely see an opportunity to work together. There are clearly some synergies there.
Which could in turn extend the life of the landfill.
Precisely, yeah.
Which is great.
If we can keep that part of the local economy for as long as we can, then that's to the benefit of the whole area. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how that project works out and how we can work together to really hopefully benefit both parties.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I see no other questions, so thank you very much for being here to present. It is, as Councillor McCallum noted, it's great to have the Waste Management Commission appear just with that overview, which I don't recall ever actually having had, so really helpful.
Good.
And great coincidence that you're here with Lafarge.
It's almost like we planned it.
Yeah, almost, just almost.
Right,
Thanks very much. Looking out of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole for January the 16th, are there errors or omissions? See, now I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll start the business portion of the meeting off with a little cannabis information. Ms. Dinaj.
There's such a large group here. I hope everyone knows we're not providing samples. All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. When I started working here less than a year ago,
Really? It's only a year? Wow.
hasn't even been a year, I would have never anticipated that my very first presentation to you would be about cannabis legislation. I do not profess to be an expert on cannabis. However, I have done a lot of research recently. However, in my work as the communications manager, I became aware of the various departments within our organization that have identified a need to address the number of issues that will arise with the new cannabis legislation. I offered to bring that team together and consolidate a plan so that we could provide you with an overview of our proposed plans and get feedback on how we think we'll need to address the legalization of cannabis. Unfortunately, my team members from HR and Bylaw are not able to attend today, but I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have regarding the impacts on their departments. I do have backup from Planning and Community Social Development in case they need to jump in and fill in on any details in my presentation. And just to clarify, as I'm going through the presentation, my focus is on the retail sale of cannabis for recreational use and not for medical purposes. There'll be one spot in the presentation where I do refer to that, but a separate medical cannabis system apparently will continue to exist, but will be evaluated by the federal government within 5 years of implementation of the law. I'll also start by clarifying there is still so much that we do not know about the legalization of cannabis. What we do know is that the Government of Canada is committed to the legalization of the purchase and use of cannabis. There's a lot of uncertainty around the specifics and timing of the proposed federal and provincial regulations, but it is commonly expected to be July 1st, 2018. And we are getting all of our information from two primary sources, the Alberta government's and the federal government's websites. However, even the information provided online leaves us with more questions than answers. As Bill 26 is waiting for proclamation and Bill C-45 is currently only at second reading in the Red Chamber, meaning it still has to be studied at committee, or many witnesses are anticipated to be called for testimony, and then before that bill is sent back to the chamber for further debate at third reading. There's also a strong possibility that amendments will be proposed to that bill, which, if passed by Senate, would then have to be sent back to the House of Commons to be approved by the MPs. That process could tack on weeks to the legislative process. And the websites haven't even been updated to what was said by the federal government and reported in the Globe and Mail last week, which was, Canadians will have to wait until late in the summer before they will be able to legally consume cannabis under a new timeline laid out by the federal government. It was also reported in similar articles that the government recognizes it could take some provinces 8 to 12 weeks of further work after the law passes before consumers can purchase legal recreational marijuana from storefronts. So in the meantime, even with the lack of clear legislation, the town of Canmore needs to decide how to update HR policies, land use bylaw, enforcement regulations, and assess the social impact on the community. So based on the information on the provincial website, we know that the government has established their 4 priorities as keeping cannabis out of the hands of children and youth, protecting public health, promoting safety on roads, in workplaces, and in public spaces, and limiting the illegal market for cannabis. So, should the Cannabis Act become law in July of this year, cannabis products, including dried or fresh cannabis and cannabis oil, will be available for purchase from retailers. These retailers will receive their products from a government-regulated distributor, that's a federal government-regulated distributor, with a distribution similar to the system Alberta currently has in place for alcohol. And so Bill 26 provides authority for the Alberta Gaming and Liquor Commission, the AGLC, to set province-wide rules and manage the distribution of cannabis. And that can be done through public online sales or by licensing the privately owned and operated cannabis stores. All of those retail locations will have very strict government oversight through the licensing that will be done by AGLC. And those things might include setting rules for operating hours, setting the number of outlets that are initially allowed in any community, and the AGLC will be able to set terms and conditions on those licenses, as well as inspect licensees and then address any violations. However, details from the provincial government on private cannabis retail, including the whole process and requirements for obtaining a license, aren't available, but are expected, and I quote, sometime in 2018. So, where can it be purchased? Well, licensed retail establishments will be the only stores that can sell cannabis, and they won't be allowed to sell cannabis if they sell alcohol, tobacco, or any pharmaceutical products. Full details on licensing and establishing a cannabis retail operation are expected to be available, and I quote, from the provincial government in early 2018. In the meantime, we understand that the provincial government has set the minimum age for the purchase and consumption at 18 years of age. And though cannabis cafes and lounges will not be permitted on July 1st, 2018, the legislation does give the authority to regulate those types of establishments if the government decides to allow them at a later date. So where can cannabis be used? Albertans will be allowed to consume cannabis in their homes and in some public spaces where smoking tobacco is allowed. They'll also be able to use cannabis products at home in order to prepare varying types of cannabis products, for example, edibles, for their own personal use. Where will it be restricted? Well, currently, the legislation is proposing that you're not able to consume cannabis or smoke cannabis anywhere the current Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Act prohibits smoking. This is a general list. I won't go into it all, but it's a fairly comprehensive list that already applies through the Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Act. Now, in an effort to protect children and limit secondhand exposure, the province is planning to prohibit public smoking or vaping of cannabis in these additional areas: in cars and any hospital property, school property, childcare facility, playgrounds, sports or playing fields, skateboard or bicycle parks, outdoor theaters, outdoor pools, zoos, and any cannabis retail outlet. And municipalities may create additional restrictions on public consumption under our existing authorities. The federal government has also indicated that it intends to add cannabis edible products and cannabis concentrates to the list of products permitted for legal sale following the law coming into force. If you're like me and you're wondering what the heck cannabis concentrates are, that would include things like cannabis shatter or cannabis wax, which are extracted using cannabis buds and butane. It's anticipated that the sale of cannabis edible products and concentrates would be authorized no later than 12 months following the legalization of cannabis. Just a few other miscellaneous details. Individuals would be allowed to possess up to 30 grams of dried legal cannabis, and they could grow up to 4 plants per household. They did note it can only be indoors. I guess they haven't seen our climate here. And all producers of cannabis or cannabis products will need to be federally licensed to operate. So any production facilities need to be authorized through the federal government. So that's the background. And now that you have that background information, how does this apply to what we need to do at the town of Canmore? So through the preliminary meetings we've had with our departments within the organization, we've identified the major issues with the new cannabis legislation as permitting it for use at work and fitness for duty, so that's going to fall into our HR policies. Being ready with zoning when the government finalizes regulations, so that's our land use bylaw. Public consumption and use, and that would fall under enforcement. And potential for divisiveness in the community, and that's the social impact that we want to look at. So let's start with HR. The upcoming legalization of cannabis has created a lot of confusion about what is and isn't allowed in the workplace with respect to cannabis consumption, both recreational and medicinal. Alberta has lots of rules already in place to address impairment on the job and to keep workers safe. But before July 2018, the provincial government has committed to reviewing occupational health and safety regulations and to work with employers, labor groups, and workers to ensure the rules continue to address impairment issues. A draft policy, a draft drug and alcohol policy, has been developed to address these questions and provide some clarity on fitness for work and to ensure the safety of our employees, the public, and town property. The draft policy outlines expectations around impairment caused by recreational use of cannabis, alcohol, and other drugs, as well as the medical use of marijuana. Council was provided with an overview of that proposed drug and alcohol policy on January 16th by the HR manager. And while stakeholder engagement is currently going on with the Health and Safety Committee, the management team, and QP representatives, this policy is expected to come back to Council for approval later in March. Although the details on licensing and establishing a cannabis retail operation haven't been provided yet by the government, the town of Canmore, not surprisingly, has received numerous inquiries and applications for cannabis-related businesses. In fact, a business license has already been issued for a medical clinic on Main Street. As well, you may have noticed that smallish billboard on the highway on the Trans-Canada for the 420 clinic, which has also been approved as a medical clinic. And it's really important to note that nothing related to the sale of recreational cannabis was approved or implied in those business licenses, strictly as a medical clinic. So under our current land use bylaw, we don't have a defined use for the retail sale of cannabis. So the town of Canmore will propose an amendment to the land use bylaw that will first define a cannabis retail store, and then secondly, add this as a discretionary use to commercial districts. It's proposed that we are going to regulate a cannabis retail store in a similar manner to a liquor store. And since that type of use, retail store use, is a discretionary use, that means a development permit would be required. And that means our application process would require proof of a provincial license and would, of course, have to comply with all those regulations that we talked about earlier that the government's proposing. Applications may be subject to additional conditions, or it could even be refused if it was deemed inappropriate. The planning department has been looking quite closely at what other communities are doing, and they really feel this is the most appropriate next step for Canmore. And there will be an opportunity for public engagement before these bylaw changes come before council in the near future, and I'll speak more to that shortly. Bill 26 proposes, as we heard, to prohibit smoking cannabis in any place where tobacco is restricted by provincial law, as well as the list we saw earlier that many other places where children might be present. However, municipalities may expand on that list of restricted locations. And Canmore currently has our smoking control bylaw, which would very likely apply to the smoking of cannabis. And if you recall, our bylaw also says that no person shall smoke in a hotel. So not just the public areas, but no person may smoke in the hotel. If the provincial legislation, when it becomes effective, does not clearly prohibit cannabis in any place where tobacco is restricted, then we may need to update Canmore's smoking bylaw to make it explicit that that bylaw applies to cannabis as well as vaping. While it may be too early in the process for the Solicitor General to officially comment on a direction for enforcement, it's likely that Canmore's community peace officers won't actually have the authority to enforce laws related to consumption and use of cannabis. If that's the case, enforcement will likely fall to the RCMP. And last but not least, the town of Canmore is collaborating with Cannabis Let's Talk Alberta to provide community conversations with stakeholders. And we know that the legalization of cannabis has the potential to bring up issues within our community. To be really clear, the intent of these sessions is to create community dialogue and not to gather input from the community to inform any bylaw updates. These are simply community conversations. And the sessions are funded by Health Canada, and the Cannabis Let's Talk Alberta is focused on that community dialogue and really supportive approaches to health and well-being. And those community conversations will be scheduled in April, May, and June once our facilitators receive training. As for financial impact, as I mentioned in the staff report, the town is working with our benefits provider to include medical cannabis, potentially as a covered expense for eligible employees. We don't know what the financial impact is going to be at this time. We've also applied for a grant to Cannabis Let's Talk Alberta to have those community conversations facilitated by our team. And there will be some costs to conduct community engagement, which can likely be covered through departmental budgets. So speaking of public engagement, we recognize that many Canmore residents may have already participated and been engaged through the federal and provincial governments as they develop their task forces on cannabis legalization. In fact, the province of Alberta already conducted extensive public engagement in 2017 with more than 60,000 Albertans sharing their input. They also conducted additional public opinion research to ensure they heard from people across the whole province. Now, one of the reasons for bringing a multi-departmental plan like this to council is because we can't look at each issue or area alone in a silo. We need to look at the full effect that legalization of cannabis will have on our entire organization. And we are in the process of developing a plan to engage with the community so that we can gain their perspective on all of the issues at the same time. And we want to ensure that any public engagement we do is conducted specific to Canmore and the concerns that Canmore residents have, and that it doesn't duplicate any provincial engagement initiatives. So we will be looking for input to inform changes and updates to affected Canmore bylaws. As I mentioned earlier, municipalities may create additional restrictions on public consumption. However, if you recall that list, it's quite extensive already, but there are still a few locations in town that would not be covered by those restrictions, such as Quarry Lake, Riverside Park, Rotary Friendship Park, Eckloff Park, dog parks, cemeteries, trails, pathways, boulevards, green spaces. And we also may need to look at consumption during special outdoor events, of which we have a few in Canmore. And we may want to consider the needs of visitors as we work through whether we would want to further restrict locations where cannabis could be consumed. For example, since we don't allow smoking in hotels or many other public places, where would visitors be allowed to use cannabis? As you can see, there's many things to consider, and we'll be asking for the public's input into the rules and regulation regarding public consumption, as well as rules that are regulated, if there's rules that are going to be above and beyond what would be regulated by the government. The timing for starting public engagement has not quite been finalized, but we anticipate it will begin in March. So that wraps up the plan that we have to address the effects of cannabis legislation on our organization. I will do my best to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much. Just one of your last points got me wondering. You suggested we may want to talk about regulating consumption of cannabis at outdoor events. Thinking of like the folk festival. Can't say as I've ever smelled any weed at the folk festival, so it's not a common occurrence, I know. Mm-hmm. But it's illegal right now, and we've never done anything to try to control consumption at outdoor events to this point. And then it becomes legal. Why would we suddenly want to start controlling that consumption?
Well, technically, it would be, for example, Folk Fest is held on a playing field and near a playground and near a school, and so it likely would not be, you wouldn't be allowed to smoke cannabis in Centennial Park. However, Calgary is looking at this, and even this was added because of the news this morning, that they were looking at, is it possible to legalize, like there are beer tents, perhaps there is a cannabis tent for certain festivals. So it's just, it flagged it as something that we may need to look at. And I think just saying, well, gee, it's not allowed on a playing field, we might need to look at that and see, and not just close our eyes and pretend it's not happening.
So I'm assuming we would wait until there's some sort of a problem identified rather than presupposing problems and create legislation ahead of the perceived problem?
Right, as I mentioned, we are waiting until the legislation comes out, and as we can see, there are a lot of places where it's restricted already. Mm-hmm. We want to go out once to the community and get their input, and until we hear from the community what they think, that will help guide us as to whether we need to be proactive or reactive.
Great. One other thought, you mentioned that it would be the AGLC that would set such rules as minimum distance of retail outlets from schools. And we're pretty close, downtown is pretty close to Lawrence Grassy. They've already permitted cannabis outlet on Main Street.
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
We have issued a business license for a medical clinic. That does not mean that that medical clinic would then automatically be converted to a cannabis retail store.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Mr. Fish had an answer or would have an answer. What would we expect to see, or is there any information on what the minimum distance might be between a school and retail outlets?
We did measure it with the planning department, and I think no matter how we measured it, Lawrence Grassy was about 250, 300 meters, and there has been no indication from the province as to what that distance would be. It just said a minimum distance. It hasn't specified. I don't believe you haven't heard anything else?
So as with most things with the province, it's wait and see.
Yes.
And through your presentation, it's evident that most all of the regulations will be coming from feds and province, and there's really very little in the way of regulations the town will initially be needing to put in place. The only real impact, I mean, the main impact locally would be to the RCMP, as you noted. And have you had a chance to have a conversation with the staff sergeant, or do you have any idea what?
I believe that Jane from Community Social Development has been meeting with the RCMP, and I know that they are aware, but I believe they are waiting to see as well. I'm not sure if they have anything more to add.
So the town is working collaboratively with the RCMP to
Yes.
co-plan?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mara. What happened there?
Not me.
You had your button on?
Nope.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. So
Your button was on, too.
minimum distances from schools, which I think makes a lot of sense. Are there currently minimum distances for liquor stores from schools?
No.
No, that's the right answer. I just don't need to expand. Good job. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this time from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for that presentation. Moving on then to item D2, the Canmore Rec Center Lifecycle Maintenance Project. Ms. Bain, Mr. Hannes, who's presenting.
Found a stump in the powder. Bound to happen, I guess. Oh, thank you. Well, that should be good. It may take.
Ms. Bain.
So good afternoon, Your Worship and members of council. This afternoon, I'd like to share with you an update on the Canmore Recreation Center Lifecycle Maintenance Project prior to tendering the trades. In June, Council directed administration to work within the allotted budget to execute scope, which addressed essential lifecycle maintenance work, including roof, structural, mechanical, and electrical system updates, code-related upgrades, and some operational and programming updates throughout the facility. In September, an update was provided to the Committee of the Whole on the user group consultation process and how this scope had evolved since that time. After the proposed schematic floor plans were solidified in the fall after user engagement, design progressed with more detail. Up until the 50% design drawings were available, in November, the Class D cost estimating was based on high-level costs based on square footage costs. As design progressed to 50% and more design details became available, the construction management started to work with the trades to test the market on the pricing in December. To everyone's surprise, the Class C cost estimate was $3 to $4 million greater than the $9.5 million construction budget set. At this time, trades have not yet been tendered, and it is important to note that until bids are received, there's still uncertainty in those cost estimates. Trade bids could come in even higher or lower than the expected budgets. Bids are currently expected to close in March, and we'll know more at that time. Heeding Council's direction to work within the budget allocated, an extensive rescoping process was conducted in January by the team. This process involved looking at design elements and construction tactics throughout the facility to determine areas where cost savings could be recognized. This included evaluating more economical fixes and finishes throughout the facility, construction execution methods, as well as scope refinements and reductions. Items that have the ability to be executed as a standalone item, either in the future years or if funds remain as part of this project, were identified, and separate pricing for these items will be requested in the tender packages so that they can be completed if fundings remain post-tender. The resulting floor plans from the scope reduction exercises have been provided in your briefing reports. The attachment lists core changes from the schematic floor plans and scope that was presented to yourselves and stakeholders in the fall of 2017. I'll list a few of those scope reductions, those being removal of the indoor snow melt and dump pit for the Alex Coletta Arena, and expansion of the operator maintenance area, removal of bleacher replacement in the Thelma Crow Arena, and refurbishment of the remaining seats in the Alex Coletta Arena, deletion of the feature central stair and wall, removal of ventilation upgrades to support open cooking in the concession, which results in a modified menu offering from what we currently have, specification changes to flooring and wall materials, and as well as reduced millwork throughout. And the comprehensive list can be seen on that attachment. As mentioned previously, separate pricing will be requested in the tender packages for some of these items. So in the event that prices are lower than the estimates, we are prepared to add these items back into the scope. If this occurs, administration plans on utilizing a tool developed to prioritize these items, and it was based on the Recreation Master Plan. The items which separate pricing will be requested for are the replacement of the bleachers in the Thelma Crow Arena, replacement of infrared spectator heating in both the Alex Coletta and Thelma Crow arenas, priced separately, installing the dump pit and ice resurfacer room expansion in the Alex Coletta Arena, upgrading the ventilation system in the concession to allow for the open cooking, adding a folding wall in the level 2 multipurpose room, replacing the benches in the Thelma Crow Arena dressing rooms, adding a second dehumidification unit, as well as additional arena unit heaters, and adding an air conditioning unit for the gymnasium and level 1 multipurpose room. In many of those cases, we will rough in the electrical and the hookups for those items. We will also request various flooring unit rates so that we can easily modify the flooring throughout if in the case that bids come in lower than expected. And although these scope changes are certainly unfortunate and significant, administration feels that the original intent of the project to complete the essential life cycle maintenance work on the rec center to ensure it remains safe, reliable, and operational for the next 25-ish years remains intact. And considerable value remains in executing the presented scope of the project. The scope does still complete the essential life cycle maintenance. We will still be doing the arena roofs, doing the structural reinforcements in the Alex Coletta Arena, core facility mechanical and electrical upgrades, including the lights, the elevator updates, and rectifying the sight lines into the arena dressing rooms. We will also still be replacing the ice plant, providing enlarged and modernized dressing rooms for the Alex Coletta Arena, including a flex change room for up to 13 athletes. We'll still be improving the viewing opportunities to both of the arenas by incorporating a multi-purpose room on level 2 and incorporating the barrier-free seating in the Alex Coletta Arena. The plant is one of the most important core life cycle and life safety items of the project and is required to ensure continuity of service of the ice sheets for our community. The ice plant request for proposal closed in December and has attracted good bids. It is currently in the final stages of evaluations and will be awarded shortly. Administration has continued to work with the rec center user groups, and I'm glad to see lots of people in the audience today, familiar faces, and all share in the same disappointment as administration that reductions were necessary at this point. Many still see the advantages of the updates that do remain in the scope. In regards to the project schedule, the tender drawings and packages are being prepared, and main tenders are expected to open in March. Construction phasing is still under development. However, construction is now anticipated to start in April of 2018 and span into 2019. Minimizing the disruptions to the core programs and events wherever possible remains a core objective of the phasing discussions. Unless otherwise advised by council, the scope will be tendered and evaluated as presented today. In the event that bids received from the trades come in over budget, administration will then reevaluate and seek council direction at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll lead off with some of the questions. So you noted there's a number of items that you had to take out of the scope, and many of them could be brought back in through future capital projects. So there was a long list: the new bleachers, the infrared heaters, that list of bullet points on the page 3 of the report.
Correct.
Those are all things that can be done over the coming years.
Correct.
Right. The one thing that was removed from scope was the stairway up to the second floor viewing area. And I assume that's not something that could be accomplished post-rehabilitation.
That is correct. The central staircase is a fundamental design change. It has effects on both the level 2 and the level 1 floor planning. It affects several of the drawings. So in that case, it would not be something that is easily identifiable as separate pricing within the tender packages.
Are you able to, I'm just curious what the impact of the project budget was from taking the stairwell out. Do you have that?
The construction, yeah, the construction budget for that stairwell ranges between about $250,000 to $300,000.
And then are there other impacts associated to that project? I mean, if the stairwell was to be reintroduced, so it's, call it $300,000 additional budget, but does that require a number of other changes to the design that may also have increased costs?
Right. The biggest indication of that decision to reintroduce that would be the timing. We would have to proceed to the tender packages so that we can remain on schedule to take opportunity of the slow May to August season. So in the case that a decision was delayed, that would come in with incurred costs for drawing revisions and all that type of thing as well.
Okay, so the primary concern right now around any delay is the impact to the construction schedule and likely impact to the operations.
Correct.
Right. Mr. Fark, you have.
So I would just add some additional content to Ms. Bain's comment. There would be a price for changing the drawings, yes, but the stair is not something we can simply put in or take out. It does have implications for other systems and other aspects of the project. There would be some impact on some of the mechanical systems. There would be impacts on the access to the Thelma Crow. So we would have to do some considerable reconfiguration, and that would come with additional costs. So the cost, the $300,000 she quotes, is for the stairway only, not for the related design changes and impacts that would take place.
And is that something that can be ascertained, I don't know, at the tender time, the impact or cost?
So the drawings that are being completed currently do not include the central stair in them, so we would not be able to get pricing from the tender process that would reflect the addition of the stairway.
Okay. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Bain, for your presentation and all the work that you've put in on this. I know it hasn't been easy.
Thank you.
Just along the stairwell, just so I understand that, there weren't drawings done to incorporate the stairwell to this point?
That is a good question. So at this point, the 50% drawings did have them in, but to proceed in this last portion to go to tender, we are looking to remove it, and that's where the criticality, the decision point is critical now, because as Michael Fark explained, it's not something that can easily be added in or not. It does affect several drawings and systems throughout, so it is difficult to identify later on as separate.
And I guess the reason I asked the question is I see the stairwell is critical. When you take a look at it, it does bring people up to the second floor. It invites people into the facility. I think functionally it would work quite well. So if we never did it right off the bat, to add it down the road would cost, I would think, significantly more.
Considerably more. It will be quite intrusive. Yes, that is correct. As we design around it, it kind of affects where the walls go on both level 1 and level 2. And that's where it is important, if it's something that we would like to do, that it is recognized at this point.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple other questions.
Okay.
So I understand the indoor snowmelt pit and the expansion of the maintenance area. Again, kind of the same line. If we do it now, and what kind of impacts would it have? I don't really understand how all that works, but if we did that now, I imagine it would have X cost, and if we added it in the future, it would be a lot more.
Right, now that one is slightly different. It is a separate area of the building. We have identified that one, and we will be asking for separate tender prices on that for that area. That being said, if it's done several years down the road, there's certain adjustments with the design teams, but should be fairly minimal. It is identified as one that we can request separate tender pricing for.
So it want to be significantly more expensive to do that in the future?
Not significant, not significantly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then the removal of the ventilation upgrades to the open cooking area and concession. I have two questions about that. It seems like it's something needed. Is it an expense thing? Give me a kind of a ballpark of what it would cost to put that venting in. And also cutting the size of the concession affects functionality. Just by adding up to 200 more square feet, what are the costs and implications that we're looking at?
Right. The cost of adding that ventilation, so it's the ventilation systems that would need to be upgraded, which is the cost savings recognized. It's about in the magnitude of about $80,000 to add the extra ventilation units required for that area. Again, that is something we have identified for separate tender pricing. In regards to the question on expansion of sizing, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. It's a little bit of a reduction for sure than the concession size that we have now with the storage unit. We could look at expanding, and the square footage costs shouldn't be too considerable, but I would have to look at that those numbers for that question there, but the concession expansion.
Okay, thank you.
I understand that a number of the components of the project are driven by code issues, so change the Alberta Building Code, and understand that the primary factor influencing the need to do the work on the roof is related to code.
That is correct. The snow load, we're looking to reinforce the structural steel to achieve the current snow loads.
So if we were to do nothing to the facility at this time, the roof is fine, it's functioning, it's got a lot of life left, but by going into the building, by opening up the building, we have to bring the whole building up to code?
Right, when you're doing an extensive renovation in this case, it does trigger the new building codes. In regards to the roof itself, we also know that we do have some leaking at this time. We know we have some significant items that need to be addressed there. We're kind of at the last stage of being able to use caulking and whatnot to continue to seal that, so the roof replacement would have to be done. Or sorry, not roof replacement, sorry, adding the ceiling to seal that roof.
Just thinking still around the roof and the code issue. So knowing that what the code says today, if we were as a municipality to do the project and not bring the roof up to code, then we would likely become liable in the future if anything should happen. Anything untoward should happen.
I would have to check with the experts on the code interpretation, but yes, we would. It is critical that we look at the snow loading on there and do that as part of the core base of the scope.
So it actually goes beyond that. So as with any project where permits are required, there would be an inspection required afterwards to ensure that we would be able to gain occupancy of the then renovated building. And if we do not meet the code requirements, we would not pass our inspections.
And that also applies to the need to replace the elevator. Is that right? The elevator doesn't meet current code?
The elevator shaft the elevator shaft size would have to be upgraded at this point.
To meet code?
Correct.
Councillor Mera?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Bain, for your report. I just had a couple questions. Many were answered already. Thank you for that. I was having a look at your diagrams here, or your plans. Have you ever considered moving the concession upstairs?
That was looked at. It was brought up by several user groups when we were doing that consultation process in this summer. We did look at that and also at the facility as a whole, and it was recognized by the architects as they were looking at it that the location was best suited on the main floor, being a little bit more central to all the services of the building.
Okay. And then the Eagles would have their refreshment concession upstairs also in this drawing, or no?
Right, and we have currently removed the separated bar, but what we will be doing is purchasing a rolling bar so that we can set that up in the multi-purpose room so that we can still provide that service.
Okay. And then I had another question regarding, if I may, regarding the dehumidification unit. Now, is that in relation to the condensing tower, or are they two different things?
They're two different things.
Okay. And our current unit is, how old is it?
The dehumidification unit? I am not sure that one off the top of my head, but I know we currently are using it to service both rinks, and we would continue to do so, and we would rough in the requirements to attach it so that in the future we could put a second unit in that would service each arena separately.
And then I have two more questions, if I may. One, how, in your drawings here, would the referees get to the Thelma Crow rink from their current location?
From their current location, they can either exit to the east or west. It's kind of there's a middle corridor out to the Thelma Crow Arena, and also quite close. We'll have the existing entrance into the Escalade Arena, or they could go off to the left and enter either arena that way as well.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had the wrong drawing up. And my last question: do you have a high demand currently for the community hall? Do you know what
For
that information? Like you're going to be developing a community hall. Is there a high demand for that?
I will maybe pass that on to Scott Mackay, in the audience here.
Okay.
Mr. Mackay?
Sorry, don't trip.
When you say the community hall, do you mean the current Lady McDonald space, or the community hall as it's labeled on the drawing here?
The current.
The current Lady McDonald. It does get used fairly often. I would say, though, I can't quote numbers off the top of my head from utilization, but I would say it does get used quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. May.
Thank you.
Just certainly through the discussions last year, there were a number of user groups that made it clear that that hall was critical importance to them, and they used it quite regularly. Dr. Cottle?
Yeah, thanks. If I could just add to that, what we tend to see with that room is competitive demand. So there are certain times of day when lots of groups want it at the same time. There are also certain times of day where it's not used at all. So it is a high demand room, but it's not regular or consistent demand. It tends to be evenings and weekends where the same user groups want to use it at the same time.
Councillor Comfort?
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. B. So my concern when renovations of this type are being done, or any renovations actually, capital renovations, I would be concerned about when we start dropping things away because there's not money that can be added to complete those desired capital renovations, that there are operational costs that would then accompany them. And the one that I was discussing earlier was the snow melt pit. So what would be the operational implications of not having the snow melt pit? So I presume then you'd have to take the Zamboni outside, take the snow outside. Eventually that snow has to be dealt with. So there'd be like extra costs for labor and so forth over time. So if we broke out the $400,000 that it takes to build a snow melt pit over a lifespan of 25 years, it doesn't work out to that much a month. And there's financing costs, of course, but could it not be? So did you look at, was that looked at, the operational cost increases over the savings in the capital by dropping the capital expenses?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Comfort. That's an excellent question. And yes, the operational implications were certainly evaluated. In this case, without the melt pit, it does, we will still be functioning as we do today with that ice resurfacer having to drive outside to dump the snow. There is operational costs to having to remove that snow and remove it. There's also a little extra wear and tear on the asphalt in the parking lot, as well as the kind of the safety of the operators and whatnot. The cost of that dump pit, and I can't see it here, but it's in the magnitude of about 300,000.
Okay.
So when evaluated versus the savings over the time, yeah, it's closer to a 20-25 year type of payback on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Bain, I just have one more question. Could you explain the different repairs we have upgraded and replaced for the both rinks roofs, the Thelma Crow and the Alex Kalita? Could you explain the difference, what's being done to each one?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? Sorry.
What is either replacement or upgraded for Thelma Crow and then...
You mean in the past?
Yes, in the past.
Since it was built?
Since it was built.
In terms of various components? So for the Thelma Crow Arena was built in the mid-2000s. At that time, the plant was originally built to service the one Alex Kalita Arena. It was at that time modified. Some of the components were reused, and it was built into a skid module and upgraded to service the two arenas as well as the curling rink. So there are components within that, the plant itself, that are actually still original. The chiller, a few of the compressors, there's some redundancies in the compressors, but the compressors as well as the cooling tower, those types of things are actually still original, and that's why they are in need of the life cycle maintenance at this time. Would you like me to go into other areas other than the plant?
Or? Yeah, thank you.
And so that comment right there, that was including the components of the ice plant. So I'm understanding from that the ice plant itself, for the most part, predates the 2007 construction?
Several of the components do, yes.
Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just along that line, when you go to tender, we have a 9-year-old ice plant that probably has some value. It'd probably be hard for the municipality to sell it, but it might be easier to put it into the tender to say, as part of the tender, can you find a home for this? Because I imagine there's arenas out there that could put it to good use. Maybe we've already thought about that.
Yeah, that is a great point, and that is something that we have in the back of our minds, whether we can package it and sell it to other groups, or at least kind of parts for other areas. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Councillor Seeley.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. So I just want to understand that with many of these items that are being left off to the side, and I think it's pretty clear in your report, but I just want to make sure, because I know that many of my colleagues understand the rink a lot better than I do. But many of these items are going to be roughed in. So, for instance, the humidifier, no, sorry, the dehumidification unit, et cetera, they're going to be roughed in so that when funds in the future come available, should they not fit within the original scope and pricing that comes forward from the trades, that we'll be able to add those in the future as capital projects through the budget process.
That is correct.
So it's kind of like building a house, not having a carburetor, not having the solar, not having those things that you want, roughing in for it, and then budgeting in the future for those items.
Correct.
Well, I'm going through that exactly right now. Thank you very much.
Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I just had 2 questions for my own edification. So the barrier-free seating in the Alex Kalita Arena, does that refer to wheelchair
yes,
seating?
that does.
Okay, thanks. And then there was one other thing. Oh, yeah, for seating, for the seats that will need replacing that were initially put in, you're asking for a separate bid for those, I believe? Or is that just going to be dropped?
So for the Thelma Crow Arena, the bleacher replacements, we are asking for separate pricing.
Okay.
For the refurbishment of the Alex Kalita Arena, currently we've done, I think it was last year, we did about 20%. We've kind of reseeded them. That is something that we have the contact to do, so that's something we could kind of operationally do if it doesn't fit into this project. So we are asking for tender pricing because we know that we have the contact to make that happen.
Okay, but it seems like there's a plan that's been acknowledged that those things do need to be seen to. They can't be left, say, for 25 years, but it can't do it initially. So is that the kind of item that A could be done as a retrofit pretty easily? It's pretty straightforward, or?
Yes, the refurbishment of Alex Galeta is quite straightforward, and if we do that kind of piecemeal at a time, also investigating if we can find other seats kind of cheaper throughout other communities. I think there's some leads there. We are also evaluating those types of opportunities as well.
And I think it's been suggested that's the kind of thing that could be fundraised for as well.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, that's it.
Councillor McCallum?
Actually, thank you for triggering that, Councillor Comfort. The seating within the Caleta, was that seating that fundraised for originally?
I know that those seats are originally from a theater. I can't speak to, and maybe others in the crowd could speak to whether that was a fundraising effort or not.
So that
sounds
was
like
fundraising.
It may happen.
Okay. I was hoping that one of my colleagues that knows more about hockey and that might be able to speak to that. So within the user groups that specifically use the Caleta, has there been discussion or an offer to work towards some fundraising to once again refurbish those seats?
Right now, we've been working with the user groups, explaining that fundraising is a possibility, and if they have the means to do so, we are more than glad to work with them and look at what that could look like for sure.
Because I know in past the towns looked at sponsorship through prior, it predates Elevation Place, and we had hired a consultant. We had very little luck with it. It also speaks to the fact that the town of Canmore is not a nonprofit, so there are certain grants and opportunities that we don't have the ability to apply for that can be applied for through other nonprofit organizations. So I think as we go through this tender process and as you look at other possibilities to replace that seating, I know it's very important to certain user groups. It would be great if there can maybe be some discussion and collaboration about grants that they could possibly apply for to have those seats refurbished or purchased or whatnot. That would be a really, I think that would be very important to quite a few of the groups. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I understand that the process going forward is as you imagine it. So in the absence of any motions from Committee of the Whole, you would tender the project, and through the tendering you'd be asking the bidders to indicate what it would cost to pull back in a number of the components that are currently out of scope. And is the intent or is the hope to find that we would be able to pull back into scope number of or some of the other components and still be meeting the 9.5 million budget?
Currently, the scope that we've presented with those excluded is in the realm of the $9.5 million. In the event that we are hoping to attract some good competitive bids and better trade pricing, in the event they come in lower, which would be great, then we are prepared to be able to add scope back in rather than missing some opportunities in that case.
Right. So you would be adding scope back in, but only to plateau at the 9.5 budget.
Yes.
Right. And if there was interest in council to have a report brought back after the tendering with some of those details and perhaps consider increasing the budget, and I'm not necessarily saying that's where council will go, but if there's an interest in having that conversation, I want to understand better the impact to the timeline of the project, because I know it's already fairly tight. If there's likely to be an impact to the ice season this coming year, and so if the tendering comes back for feedback from council at that point, how would you see that impacting your current timeline?
Correct. So right now we have the tender process looking to close at the end of March. We can certainly be proactive and have those types of meetings set up. We would need a fairly quick turnaround because we are looking to have the trades mobilized middle April to kind of start taking advantages of that May season. So, but there's certainly some days in there that we can work on a plan if that's required.
Okay. Ms. CAO, Ms. DeSoto.
If I could just add to Ms. Bain's response, it would be the desire of administration to have clear direction regarding that process, because you know, without any further direction, we would not be bringing tendered prices back to council.
Yeah, I was just seeing if we're done with question period, and then
okay,
maybe call a short recess and think about a motion, the wording.
Okay.
So, are there any other questions from Ms. Payne? Seeing none, thanks for your report. And I'll call a short recess right now and do some deep thinking.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to go upstairs. put forward for committee of the whole. And if the municipal clerk will put them on the overhead, we can discuss and vote on these motions. So this time I'll move the committee of whole direct administration to come to council as soon as possible to get direction regarding the reintroduction of a central stairwell into the design and scope for the project. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I will then move. Oh, I've got it here. Committee of whole direct administration to bring tender pricing. No. No. Yeah, I moved the committee of the whole direct administration to suspend the current design process until the decision is made by council on a change of scope. So discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And then we'll move on to item. No. D3. Joint use agreement with Canadian Rockies Public Schools. I got to be out of here at 4.
Maybe if there had been some debate, they might have known.
Okay, the joint use agreement with Canadian Rockies Public Schools.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Borman, members of council. So yes, we're here this afternoon to talk about a new agreement that we have negotiated with the Canadian Rockies Public School. And just to help give a little bit of context, the agreement is between the town of Canmore and the school division, and it's specific to the 3 different school sites that they have here in Canmore. The agreement that we're working on right now has been in place since 2009. A number of changes and circumstances have occurred since then, so it was prudent to sit down with them and just renegotiate a new agreement that made better sense for both parties. So the agreement, as it's worded, is about joint use of both the facilities. Both partners or both parties have facilities, sports fields, parking lots, specifically by the high school, and playgrounds as well that are on those school sites. And the intent, overarching intent, is to have an agreement that is mutually beneficial to both the community and the students. And also what the school division wanted to have in this agreement, to have recognized, which is in the body of the opening page, is what they have done in terms of giving leased land to the town for 40 years for the construction of the roundhouse. They wanted some recognition for that as well. And the other big one was cost certainty. So we've, under the current agreement, we've been sending them invoices under the current mechanism, and they've been having some difficulties paying for that, and the prices for the invoices we've been sending them have fluctuated each year. So we felt it was best to come up with some cost certainty and then just allow it to increase by inflation, but we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. So for the school site, I just wanted to, highlight the 3 different locations that we have the school at. So this is the high school, and I think it's also important to highlight land ownership as well with each school. They're all different. And OLS is completely different as well. So here you can see the high school right here. There's the parking lot that we refer to in the body of the contract. And there's the sports field that the town of Canmore maintains. And you can see what's highlighted or shaded is the part that's owned by the town. And then the balance is owned by the school board. And so when we move on to the next site, here's Lawrence Grassley Middle School, and same thing. This is their site. There's the roundhouse that I just spoke about. And here's a roadway allowance right through the property. But you can see the sports field and the playground are also on lands owned by the town of Canmore, and not by the school division. But then moving across the valley to Elizabeth Rummel School, it's different as well, in that here, when you look up ownership, it's a 50-50 ownership between the school division and the town of Canmore. So it was just something that came up in the conversation, and it'd be beneficial for people to be aware of that each situation is a little bit different. So then, the facilities that the town of Canmore is able to provide for the school division and for their use is the rec center. Then there's a number of fields there, ones that are either on-site or off-site. And then there's the tennis courts and the Three Sisters Disc Golf Course. They use that as well for their outdoor education program. So those are all available to them. And conversely, and then I shared what they have. They have their facilities, and it's really just their classrooms, their specialty classrooms, where they do foods, for example, and then their gymnasiums is a really popular one that we use for programming, which is administered by the Recreation Services area. So that's why I have Mr. Mackay here, if there's any questions specific to that. So then, moving on to what the new agreement benefits are. Historically, we were charged by the school division a cost per room, per hour. And so if we had 3 rooms, we would get charged for each room, even if they were at the same time. And so the new agreement is we would get cost per hour regardless of how many rooms they used, or we would program. So there's quite a bit of benefit there. So if right now, for example, if we had 3 programs we wanted to do and it was in a classroom, if we did 3 different classrooms, we would get charged for each one of those. So right now we have the ability to book 3 classrooms all within the same hour, and so we would get charged about 1/3 of what we were charged before. So it's a very different relationship we would have and how we would pay. So based on an analysis by the Recreation Services Department, we expect to achieve at least $15,000 in savings each year in this new approach. So it's very, very beneficial to us. All they would need to do is just change how they do their programming, and it would be very beneficial to them. Where this arrangement doesn't work is if the school is closed. So it would be on the weekends if we did programming, or during breaks, where they would have to bring in a monitor. We would have to pay that monitor fee and a custodian fee. In this situation, all we do is have to pay a monitor fee, and they don't care if we have 1 classroom or 10 classrooms. It's just the 1 fee per hour. And they do their custodial work after the programming is complete, so there's no additional cost to the school division, and they pass that on to us, and that's where the benefit lies with us. The other one is we put specific language in there that we would be a priority in their programming. They do provide programming to other community groups as well, but we wanted to ensure that we were a priority so that we continue to provide the programming in the hours that were beneficial to the programs that we provide. So we have language in there. And the other one that was new, and I should admit that part of the language in this agreement does resemble the one recently signed by the town of Banff. So they're very, very similar. And one of the things that we did wanted to highlight, and especially in light of 2013 and also the other risk of future emergencies that we may encounter, is we do have language in here that allows us access to their school sites in the case of an emergency situation. Benefits to CRPS. So cost certainty, I highlighted that at the end. Right now, when we maintain a sports field, every year the cost to maintain the sports field fluctuates. We do soil samples in the fall, and we use that analysis to determine what type of work we need to do in the spring. So that could be less, more fertilizer, we're adding sand, aeration, all of those things we don't necessarily have to do every year, and what ends up happening is the cost per field per year goes up and down. And it's been, I think for anybody, it would be very difficult to get an invoice under the current agreement where it says you're just responsible for half the price, but you have really no control over what that price is. That's just the cost to maintain, and that's directed by the town based on our field analysis. So what we've done is we went in and we averaged the cost per field over the last 3 years and established a fee to maintain it. So that is the fee. Both parties know what that is. It can be reviewed from time to time as costs go up, and it can only be increased by inflation, so it gives much more cost certainty to the school division. Then there was the opportunity for cost reduction. They give us a lot more of a discount than what we give them. They don't rent a lot of our facilities that often. This new agreement, I should say, does exclude elevation place. It is not a factor in here. The current arrangement for swimming instruction and access to the gym is completely separate from this agreement. So we're just talking the rec facilities in terms of internal space. But we wanted to highlight, we use so much of their space, the gymnasium, the classrooms, and so on, that $15,000 we're expecting to achieve. So this new agreement recognized that. So we reduced the cost of maintaining the field by that amount, and I have a summary table at the end that will show that more clearly. We also wanted to highlight, under the current agreement, they pay for half of the cost of the field. And what we've recognized is they don't really use the field half the time. We also rent it out to users, and it's also open to the public a lot of the time. Really, they are using the fields Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, and that's it. But in the evenings, we book it out, and then for the rest of the time, it's open to the general public, and they do wear and tear on the field as well. So what we've done is we've reduced the split in the maintenance cost from half or 50% to 40%, recognizing that user group and the wear and tear that they provide on the fields, or they do on the fields. We looked at the playgrounds. It's a smaller asset item, but we don't book out the playgrounds, and when you drive by the schools at any time, the playgrounds are heavily used, and so we felt it would be prudent to just keep that at the 50% cost share between the two playground sites that we have, because there's no playground at the high school. So, yeah, there's where I've talked about that $15,000 reduction, and then similarly, conversely, they also recognize that from time to time they may have an emergency and need access to our town facilities, you know, just like last year when they had the lockdown with the gunshots on 7th. Veterans Way. If they did need to evacuate, it would have been nice if they had an agreement in place that they would be able to take the children to a safe location. So here's that table I was talking about. So here's the, whoops, I should not touch that mouse. No. There. Maybe I can use this mouse. So at the top, we have the cost to maintain the 3 sports fields per year. So quite a chunk of money is spent on those. That is both our internal staff labor as well as contracted services and materials. So like I talked about with sand, or if we needed to rent a aerator, for example, it would all be covered in that cost, and that's the approximate cost. We also wanted to recognize that, you know, we do get revenue for it, so we offset it by what the revenue is for the sports fields, and you can see it's actually not a lot. It's about $3,000 a year for Canmore Minor Soccer, for example, with the rentals that they use for the sports fields. So it's really minor, but we felt we should reduce the cost by that, and so there's the net cost to maintain the fields to the town and to the school division, about $57,000. And again, further down, if we change this cost split between 50 to 40%, recognizing the general public and the users, it drops down to a further almost $23,000 is the cost to maintain versus the $30,000. Then we throw in the playgrounds. They stay at 50%, so no change there. So then the total sports fields and maintenance costs under the current situation would be about $32,000 versus $26,000, with recognizing the revenue from user groups as well as the change in cost share. Then what we have down here is we did a summary of what the benefits are in terms of savings for bookings facilities in our with the partners locations. So right now, like I said, they don't rent a lot of space from us, and you can see what the values are. It's about $1,700 is the full market cost, and we actually reduce it by about $600 or $700, which is the other side. So not a lot of money per year. And so we've decided, similarly to the arrangement they have with the town of Banff, is that we wouldn't charge them for that space anymore. EP, of course, but not for the rec center. We would remove that. And then you can see here what we've also done is then recognize the cost savings in the facility use. Currently, it's about $10,000 that we actually get charged. The market cost would be about $20,000, and we would save about $10,000. They charge us about half. We expect that we can save now $15,000. So when we take that off the total cost to maintain the sports fields and playgrounds, we're at about $13,000 under the new version, and that would have sat around $24,000 under the old version, if that makes any sense. And I should, so what we have written in the agreement beginning for 2018 is that they would be invoice and pay for the $12,785, and then that would be increased by inflation each year going forward. And I think that is the end of my presentation. I can answer any questions if there are.
Great. Straightforward.
Okay. Sorry, Mayor Barman, I should add that one other thing, administration at this point is looking to enter into this agreement to be signed by administration and not council. The old agreement was signed by council, but we are looking to, it's similar to the town of Banff. Their administration signed it, and we just want to provide an update today and just let you know we're planning to enter into this agreement to begin going back to January 1st of this year.
Great, thank you. Councillor Comfort.
Thanks, Mr. Comeau, for your presentation. I just have one question. There were 3 fields cited in the financial chart there. And so is that Millennium, Centennial, and the field at ERS?
It's the 3 fields at the 3 school sites. So it's ERS, LGMS, so Centennial, and then the high school, not Millennium.
Not Millennium,
yeah.
Okay. And so the one at the high school, that's the one that's referred to as the practice field. Is that right?
Yes, it's not regulation size.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I don't have any questions specific to your report. I thought it was fairly straightforward, comprehensive. Just a couple of notes in the joint use agreement itself. There's a couple of sections that were noted through the old style. So in 5.1.2, it refers in the body of the section to 5.1.1A. And in 7.1.4, it refers to 7.1H. It's just, I guess, some old
just fix that up
numbering.
again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I have no questions. Nice to have that work done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Not needing any sort of a motion, so thanks very much for being here. And so we will then move on to item E1, Councillor Updates. No questions from anybody? Okay, we'll move on. Are there any questions from any councillor to any other councillor regarding their report? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 questions, and conveniently, they're all for you. My first question is with regards to item A, that meeting with the Stoney Nations consultant, Bill Snow, and there's a discussion about a study that the Stonies had recently conducted of grizzlies in the Kananaskis area. If at some point that could be shared with the rest of council, that would be super.
Yeah, we actually talked about it at that meeting, and I suggested it'd be nice to get Mr. Snow in and give it, it's about a 20-minute PowerPoint. It was quite interesting.
Cool.
So I did suggest to him that we should arrange that at some point.
That would be great. And then just off the side of that is I noted that you had had the opportunity to attend the swearing in of the new Chiniki band. And if there's ever an opportunity for other councillors to attend ceremonies like that, please don't be afraid to extend that invitation.
It's by invitation from the Stoney Nakoda. Mm-hmm. And honestly...
Well, it would be a public ceremony, would it not?
I guess anybody can show up, but there was nobody else there other than Chiniki. Myself and the MLA were the only two people in the room that weren't Chiniki. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I can't very well ask them to invite other people. But through our ongoing actions with the Chiniki and the other bands, I think we're building better relations. And I think this invitation came directly as a result, well, frankly, I think directly as a result of us having invited Bill Snow to come in and present, because he works with the Chiniki band. Mm-hmm. So the more that kind of work that we do, and the more we engage, I think the more of that sort of reaching out we'll see on the part of the whole Stoney Nation.
I just wanted to make it clear that I'm interested as well in attending
I'll let
possibilities like that.
I'll let them know.
That or other possibilities, right?
Sure.
And then my third question was that item L, the item where you had the opportunity to speak to the Canmore Young Adults Network. Again, if there's ever opportunities for other council members to participate or attend those with you, because I found out about it on social media.
So you weren't at the dinner after the, after the strategic planning.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just saying in future it'd be great to be invited. Thank you.
Depending on the nature of the conversation, you bet. Any other questions for anybody? Okay, moving on then to item F1, service area reports. We'll go through the report as usual. Any questions related to Section A, CIO's office? Section B, municipal services.
Under CIO's office.
I'm already past that one.
I didn't realize it was a different section. I'm sorry.
Okay. What's your question?
And I think council may have already asked this, but I wasn't at that meeting, was where does Jim Yonker's salary, does that get paid by somebody else now that he's at the City of Calgary?
It's paid by us, but Ms. DeSoto can speak to that.
Yes, Mr. Yonker's secondment to the City of Calgary was part of the overall budget approval by council in December. So we had allocated approximately $60,000 of the $200,000 budget to allow that secondment to happen.
And that's not for the year though? Would that be for the 6-month period? Or?
We are expecting that to be until such time as a bid corporation or a decision of council to not participate in a bid corporation has been made.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to firstly thank administration for providing a separate item within the Committee of the Whole report with regards to the Olympics. I think that provides a lot of transparency to the community. And a question I had with regards to the mayor and CAO heading to Pyeongchang in a week. In the original budget, it had stated that we were putting $15,000 aside, providing funding for the mayor and possibly 1 or 2 others to attend the mandatory candidate city observer program. I was wondering if that number's been refined now that you're about a week out from your trip. Understanding it is a total ballpark.
Ms. DeSoto.
So we have been trying to get pricing, currently the only thing we've had to pay out of pocket is our flights. The IOC has block booked rooms and is providing the program and shuttling for us while we're there, but there is expectation that that is going to get billed back to the City of Calgary and then billed back to the town. So I haven't been able to get any budget pricing from the city on that.
Any other questions for that section of the service area report? For section B, municipal services. Councillor Comfort.
I just wanted to remark that I'm glad to see that our rec services are working with CRPS to be able to deliver the big fun at the school. It's a great use of collaboration of facilities as per Mr. Kamala's report.
I agree. Any questions then sparked by the report in item C, municipal infrastructure?
Oh. Sorry, I had one more.
Was that, there was a comment over there?
After Councillor Comfort, I would just like to add some clarity to or additional comment on one of the points from municipal infrastructure.
Okay.
So sorry, I had one more question about unprotected services.
Let me just turn your mic on.
Thanks. Under protective services, coffee with a cop, 2 questions. Do we know how many attendees were there? And will we repeat this?
Dr. Cottle.
There were between 20 and 25 attendees, and yes, they will
keep going?
Try it. They will try it again. I don't know that it's a long-standing. There were certain elements of it that were not necessarily productive. But it was productive enough that they're going to do it again, yes. So the thought is once or twice a year, maybe 3 times.
Okay, thank you.
You must have missed Councillor Seeley's report where he had that number. Any other questions? Any other questions for any part of the service area report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the, oh boy, you gotta be fast here. Councillor McCallum.
Well, Your Worship, we're going to be on break for such a long time. I have such a curious mind. Under engineering services, with regards to the Benchlands Trail engagement that occurred last night, do we have an idea as to how many people were able to attend that event?
Mr. Fark?
Apparently there were 34.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very kindly.
Did you have something else, Ms. Soto?
But Mr. Fark?
Okay, then Mr. Fark, the mic is yours, Mike.
Thank you, sir. So just wanted on the topic under planning, the TSMV ASP, I just wanted to provide some additional clarity on that. To be clear, there is not the intent to move forward with a formal application until after the province has made the decision on the wildlife corridor. There is intending to be some work that will take place in the interim period because there has been no timeline for a corridor decision set by the province. So some work on the will go forward in the meantime. Obviously, there has been some extensive engagement already throughout the history of this project. However, for the current iteration, we are just starting the conversation at this point now, moving forward. And the intent of bringing this to Council's attention is to make you aware of the work that we are doing and will be doing likely in the future on this project.
Thanks very much. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Fark in regards to that report? Okay, then moving on to the council resolution action list. Are there questions on that report? Seeing none, the Bow Valley Regional Housing Report, and there's a report in here from Biosphere. If there are any questions on either of those 2 reports, either Councillor McCallum or I could. You have a question, Councillor?
Just a statement with regards to the BVRH. So next Friday is the mulligan on on the ribbon cutting, and I'm guessing that most of council's received an invitation to that. I know that Councillor Sanford has, as Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Sanford, yeah.
And fingers crossed, nobody gets sick.
Yep. I'll be anxiously awaiting news of its successful cutting of the ribbon. Call me right away. I'm in Australia. That takes us to the end of the report, or to the agenda. And I will move committee of the whole be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.